All right, so we're diving into the French Revolution today. You sent over a ton of material, so I can tell this is something you really want to like get a handle on.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's always heard the "let 'em eat cake" line, you know?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
But maybe not everyone really knows like what led up to all that, what caused it, the whole off with their heads thing.
totally. And to really get it, we need to go back to France in the late 1700s.
Okay, so paint me a picture. What's the scene like?
Well, imagine France is like this powder keg just waiting to explode. You've got all these ingredients for revolution just kind of simmering there.
Okay, so let's break down those ingredients then. What were they?
Well, the historians you sent over all seem to agree on three main ones. You've got the economic struggles, the social inequality, and then these Enlightenment ideas that were spreading everywhere.
Okay, yeah, those are all huge. Let's start with the economic stuff. One of the articles you sent over talked about how France was basically broke, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it wasn't just like some random downturn. This article actually points to France helping out the American revolutionaries.
Oh, wow. So they were bankrolling a whole other revolution across the Atlantic.
Exactly, and it ended up draining their treasury, like immensely.
That's wild. So they're supporting liberty abroad while things are falling apart at home.
Right. And then on top of that, you've got this insane social inequality that was just baked into the system.
Yeah. One of the other sources you sent, Citizens, I think it was,
Mhm.
really drives that point home.
Yeah, that book goes deep into this whole three estate system
Yeah.
where the clergy and the nobility, so the first and second estates, they had all the power and privilege,
Hmm.
but like zero responsibility when it came to actually paying for stuff.
Oh, so it's like a tiny sliver of the population is living large while everyone else is struggling to make ends meet.
Basically.
Hmm.
And the commoners, the third estate, they were the ones footing the bill.
Yeah.
Imagine that. You're working your tail off, paying heavy taxes, and a select few are just, living in unimaginable luxury.
Yeah, I can see how that would create some tension.
Yeah,
No wonder people were ready for a change.
exactly. And then to make things even more volatile, you have these Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau, whose work you specifically wanted to look at.
Yeah, Rousseau's a big one.
Right. And his ideas about individual liberty, popular sovereignty, all that stuff, it was revolutionary. And it was spreading like wildfire, especially among the educated middle class.
So you've got economic hardship, social inequality, and then these radical new ideas floating around. It's like a recipe for, well, for revolution.
Right. It's almost like it was inevitable.
So what was the actual spark, though? What event really kicked things off?
Well, most of your sources point to the Estates General in 1789, King Louis XVI. He was facing this massive financial crisis, so he called this assembly hoping to get approval for some new taxes.
Sounds reasonable enough.
Except it totally backfired. The Third Estate, they came in demanding more representation, more voting rights. They
Yeah.
basically wanted to upend the entire power structure.
Wow, so this was like the moment things really started to shift.
Yeah, and it all culminated in this incredibly dramatic event, the tennis court oath.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that, but refresh my memory.
So basically, the Third Estate gets locked out of their meeting hall, right? So what do? They go to a nearby indoor tennis court and they take this oath vowing not to disband until they've drafted a new constitution for France.
That's a power move.
Totally. It was a direct challenge to the king and a clear sign that the people were demanding a say in how they were governed.
And then, of course, there's the storming of the Bastille. Can't talk about the French Revolution without mentioning that.
Right. July 14th, 1789, the day the Bastille, a royal prison and symbol of oppression, fell.
Yeah, one of the books he sent over described it as a day of pure chaos and fear.
It wasn't just about storming a building. It was about the people taking back their power.
And this act of defiance had ripple effects all across Europe, right?
Yeah.
Monarchs were getting nervous.
Absolutely. It was like a wake-up call. They saw what could happen when people got fed up enough.
Wow, so the revolution is in full swing?
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, there's this period called the Great Fear, where this unrest that started in Paris basically spread throughout the countryside. Peasants, inspired by what happened in Paris, start rising up against their landlords. They're burning feudal documents, demanding change.
So this is like a full-blown social upheaval.
Exactly. And in the midst of all this chaos, the National Assembly, which was formed from the remnants of the Third Estate, they start implementing some pretty radical changes.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest ones, and this is something you specifically wanted to dive into, is the abolition of feudalism.
Yeah, that's a huge deal.
Right. It basically dismantled centuries of social hierarchy and privilege in one fell swoop.
I mean, that's just incredible to think about. And then they come out with the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen.
Yes. Another pivotal document. This one laid out the idea that all individuals, regardless of their social status, had fundamental rights. It was revolutionary.
It's crazy how much changed in such a short period of time.
Right. But things were just getting started. The French Revolution wasn't exactly known for its peaceful transitions.
Yeah, things were about to get a lot more complicated and a lot more violent.
Exactly. But that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
So last time we were talking about all this progress, abolition of feudalism, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. It felt like France was really on the cusp of something new.
Yeah, it seemed like real change was possible.
But as we all know, the French Revolution didn't exactly have a happy ending.
Right. It's like one of the sources you sent over said revolutions rarely follow a straight path.
Yeah, they tend to get a little messy.
And in the case of France, things were about to take a pretty dark turn.
Yeah, the Reign of Terror.
Mm.
It's hard to think about that period without picturing, the guillotine, Robespierre, all the executions.
That's like the darkest chapter of the revolution, for sure.
So how did things get so extreme? I mean, the revolution started with all these noble ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity. How did it descend into such violence?
Well, one of the articles you sent, The Shadow of the Guillotine, I think it was really dives into that question.
And what does it say?
Well, it argues that a lot of it had to do with external threats. Remember, France was at war with other European powers at the time.
Oh, right. Other countries were freaking out that
Yeah.
the revolution would spread.
Exactly. They were terrified. So France is basically fighting for its survival, and it creates this climate of fear and paranoia.
So it's like they're under attack, which makes them even more radical.
Right. And this paranoia was really exploited by groups like the Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre.
Ah, Robespierre, the poster boy for the Reign of Terror.
Yeah, he and his followers, they believed that extreme measures were necessary to protect the revolution.
Protect it from what?
From enemies, from anyone who didn't fully support their vision of this republic of virtue.
And anyone who disagreed was labeled an enemy of the people.
Exactly. And that's how you get the Reign of Terror.
Wow.
This period of intense repression where anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity could be arrested, imprisoned, or even executed.
Yeah, one of the books you sent over talked about how this fear just permeated everyday life.
Oh, The Fall of the King. Yeah.
That one. It was chilling. People were afraid to speak their minds, to question anything.
It was a time when neighbors turned against neighbors. Friends denounced each other. It was really a dark time.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly things can spiral out of control.
And it wasn't just directed at the nobility or the clergy either. Lots of ordinary people got caught up in the terror.
So what happened to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette during all this? I mean, they were obviously symbols of the old order.
Yeah, one of the historical accounts you shared goes into detail about their imprisonment and trials. It's pretty heartbreaking, actually.
So what happened?
Well, Louis was put on trial for treason and executed in January of 1793.
Wow. And Marie Antoinette.
She followed him to the guillotine later that same year.
It's kind of a tragic end to their story.
Yeah, it really shows how much things had changed.
So the monarchs are gone, the terror is in full swing. What else were the revolutionaries doing during this period?
Well, they weren't just focused on executions, they were also trying to completely reshape French society.
Oh yeah, one of your sources mentioned something about de-Christianization.
Right. They actually tried to replace the traditional calendar with a revolutionary one.
Wow, they were really trying to erase the past.
Yeah, they wanted to create a whole new world, a republic of virtue, based on reason and civic duty.
So, did it work? Did they achieve their vision?
Well, not exactly. The Reign of Terror eventually imploded under its own weight. It became too much, too violent, too paranoid.
So what happened?
Well, in July of 1794, Robespierre himself was overthrown and executed.
Wow, so even the architect of the terror couldn't escape it.
It's like they say revolutions often devour their own children.
So what happened after Robespierre? Was France finally able to find some peace and stability?
Well, a new government called the Directory was established, but it struggled to maintain order. There was still a lot of unrest and uncertainty.
So what happens next? Does France descend back into chaos? Or does someone else step in to fill the void?
Oh, that's a great question, and that's where we're going to pick up in part 3 of our deep dive.
Because a new figure was about to enter the scene. A man who would change the course of French history forever.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
So we've gone from like the hope and excitement of the early revolution to the darkness of the Reign of Terror. And now it seems like we're entering this whole new chapter.
The Age of Napoleon.
Right. And it's interesting because one of the sources you sent over kind of frames Napoleon as both the end of the revolution and like a continuation of it in some ways.
Yeah, it's a weird paradox, right? Because he's often seen as this like antithesis to the revolution's ideals, but at the same time, he kind of embodies some of its core elements too.
So how did he pull that off?
Yeah.
How did this military general become the ruler of France?
Well, he was super smart about it. One of the books you sent over, Napoleon's Coup, goes into a lot of detail about how he basically manipulated the situation to his advantage.
So paint me a picture.
Yeah.
What was going on in France at the time?
Okay, so it's 1799, and France is still a mess. There's political instability, economic hardship. People are just exhausted from all the chaos.
So there's this power vacuum just waiting for someone to fill it.
Exactly. And that's where Napoleon comes in. He stages this coup d'etat, overthrows the Directory, and bam, he's the first consul of France.
It's like something out of a history book.
Right. And he was really good at playing to both sides. He appealed to the masses who were craving stability and also to the elites who were afraid of more radicalism.
So he's kind of this authoritarian figure, but also a reformer?
Exactly. He actually implemented a lot of important changes. He codified French law, centralized the government, modernized the education system.
Some of those reforms, like the Napoleonic Code, had a huge impact, right?
Oh, yeah. They influenced legal systems all over Europe. It's kind of wild to think about.
So it's like this revolution that starts with the rejection of monarchy, ends with an emperor in charge.
Yeah, it's definitely ironic. It makes you wonder, did the French Revolution ultimately fail? Or did it just morph into something different?
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer.
Right. I think the answer is probably somewhere in between. Napoleon definitely put an end to the revolution in its purest form, but he also carried some of its ideas forward.
So maybe it's less about failure and more about transformation.
Exactly. Revolutions are messy. They don't always end the way people expect them to.
Speaking of messy outcomes, let's talk about the French Revolution's legacy.
Yeah.
You sent over a bunch of stuff about that. What are your main takeaways?
Well, one of the most obvious impacts is on the political landscape of Europe. I mean, the French Revolution inspired revolutions and uprisings all over the continent.
It's amazing how one event can have such far-reaching consequences.
Right. And it wasn't just about politics either. A lot of the legal and social reforms that Napoleon implemented those had a huge impact too.
Like the Napoleonic Code.
Exactly. And the revolution's focus on education, secularism, the separation of church and state, all of that had a lasting effect on how societies developed.
So even though Napoleon brought an end to the revolution in its most radical form, its core principles continued to shape things.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to remember the cultural legacy. Think about all the symbols and imagery that came out of the French Revolution. The tricolor flag, the Marseillaise anthem, the motto, liberté, égalité, fraternité.
Those are still powerful symbols today.
Exactly. They represent these universal ideals that continue to inspire people all over the world.
It's really a fascinating and complex legacy, full of contradictions and unintended consequences.
Yeah, it just goes to show that revolutions are rarely simple stories. They're messy processes with a mix of progress and tragedy.
So what do you think is the most important thing for people to take away from all this?
I think the biggest lesson is that history is not just a bunch of dates and names. It's a story that continues to shape our world today. In the French Revolution, with all its complexities and contradictions, it offers valuable lessons about power authority and the fight for freedom and equality.
It's a good reminder that those fights are still going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And who knows what seemingly small events happening right now might have huge consequences down the line.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about.
That's the beauty of history. It's a constant reminder that the future is never set in stone.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today. From the storming of the Bastille to the rise of Napoleon. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And remember, this is just the beginning of your exploration. There's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider.
That's so true. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up here. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the French Revolution.
It's been a pleasure. And until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of history.
Okay, see ya.